And let's start today in Houston, where things are a bit confusing. Because David Culley, the new head coach of the Houston Texans, and I think he's in an unwinnable situation when it comes to a lot of things. But the most obvious issue with the Texans, Myles, is the status of quarterback Deshaun Watson. And on the same day that Culley was due to have a pre-free agency press conference or post-combine that didn't happen press conference or whatever it was, he was having a press conference today. Before that, though, word emerged of an interview that he did with the Huddle and Flow podcast, Jim Trotter, Steve Weish. Here is Culley talking to Weish and Trotter about Deshaun Watson.
Will Deshaun Watson be the starting quarterback for the Houston Texans in 2021?
He is our starting quarterback as of right now. He is our starting quarterback. Things happen between now and then we'll see what happens. He is our starting quarterback.
Right now.
Mm-hmm. That's right now. And hopefully in the future. I'm excited to be here. One of the reasons I'm excited to be here is because of Deshaun Watson. And regardless of what's happening outside this building, which, quite frankly, fellas, I don't hear or read or listen to what happens outside this building. I don't. But the point is, inside this building, inside this organization, we feel positive about moving forward with this football team with Deshaun Watson.
Okay, starting quarterback right now was emphasized a couple of times. He also said we want guys who are all in. That reminds me of the Mike Tomlin line. We want volunteers, not hostages. And every time I hear that, I think, then why do you have draft picks? Why do you have draft picks? Draft picks are not volunteers. They're hostages. They involuntarily must join your team. What? They should all be free agents. You should dispense with all your draft picks and just sign undrafted free agents if you want volunteers, not hostages. But that's what he said, Myles. And I think the fair takeaway was, as Jim Trotter pointed out, the Texans have warmed up to the reality that they're going to have to trade Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think when you hear the words right now, you start to think about what the Rams were saying about Jared Goff, right? That's what Sean McVay said just after the season. He's our quarterback right now. Les Snead started talking about Jared Goff a little bit after the season. He is our quarterback at the moment. And then a few days later, Jared Goff had been agreed to be traded to the Detroit Lions, and they got Matthew Stafford in return. So when you start hearing the words like right now, and Jim Trotter then takes from that, yeah, they are starting to soften their stance, and that's why Jim Trotter said he believes that Deshaun Watson will be traded because of the words that David Culley used. So yes, I think that was a really... It was the right conclusion to come to, basically, when you hear what David Culley was saying, and it's that specifically. When you hear the words right now, and then he even says, those things are subject to change, well, then that's, I think, the logical conclusion that you can come to there, Mike.
And apparently things were subject to change because Culley, a couple of hours ago, had his press conference. Here he is speaking to reporters when asked about Deshaun Watson.
Hey, Coach Culley, you've said repeatedly the team is committed to Deshaun Watson. Is he committed to you and the team?
Yes, he is.
How do you know that?
Well, he's a Houston Texan, and again, I know that. I feel like that with the commitment that we've made to him, and I feel like that same commitment will be there with us also moving forward.
That awkward moment was just, I'd say, I don't know, 5% of the various answers Culley gave about Deshaun Watson. And it was all from this notion of we're committed to Deshaun Watson. And he wouldn't delve into his conversations with Deshaun Watson, but I'm looking at the post that I did based on the actual quotes from the press conference. He said, I don't know about him not wanting to be a Houston Texan. Well, you've spoken to him, and it's been reported that he made it clear he doesn't want to be a Texan. So I think someone made it clear to David Culley, thou shalt not say anything to suggest that we may possibly be trading Deshaun Watson, either because Culley got it wrong or, Myles, I think more likely, part of their effort to get maximum return for Deshaun Watson is to act like they aren't going to trade him, that maybe this idea that they're holding firm and holding out and holding fast in their notion that he's not going to be traded is the thing that maybe gets them an even better package for Deshaun Watson by the time it's all said and done. But I don't know how many people are going to believe that when you juxtapose what he said to Weish and Trotter to what he said to the media today.
Yeah, to me, it was very obvious that somebody said to David Culley, hey, man, that's not the stance that we're going to take publicly on Deshaun Watson right now. So you really can't go out there and say that. Because the thing that was interesting to me about that presser was at first he was basically saying, I'm going to defer all those personnel things. That's going to be our GM, Nick Caserio. That's where that really goes. And then as he kept having to answer questions, he started saying the things about the commitment. And that answer that he had where he says, Deshaun Watson is committed to us because we're committed to him and all that. That's kind of ludicrous. Like, what kind of reporting have we all seen where we know that he had a meeting with Deshaun Watson, and obviously he doesn't want to say what the contents of that meeting were, but we all know that Deshaun Watson wants out. And this whole notion of, I don't hear or see anything that's going on outside the building. It's not true. There are people who are paid in all of these organizations to make sure that the head coach knows exactly what's going on and what's being said about the organization from the outside of it. So I understand that David Culley is in a very tough spot right now, but the whole thing is just so weird, Mike. Like, we all know, I think, the way that this has to end because Deshaun Watson's made it clear he's not playing for them anymore. So despite whatever their public stance is right now, despite whatever price they think they want to drive up, at the end of the day, Deshaun Watson is probably going to be traded.
This is an example of what dysfunctional teams do. This just underscores that the Texans right now are a mess and that David Culley, in the first instance, couldn't properly implement the intended external message that we're all in with Deshaun Watson. We're not wavering on anything with Deshaun Watson. That's where we are. That's what we're doing. And this even goes back to the Culley introductory press conference when Nick Caserio's words fairly could be interpreted as the door is open for something. He just didn't say the door is open for something. And maybe they are intending through confusion to maximize what they get for Deshaun Watson, but I don't think so. I think this is just the latest tangible evidence of a team that has lost its way, has no idea how to get back on track, in part because I've yet to see that they've replaced Amy Palchik as the head of PR. I don't know who's handling the PR there now at a high level, at a VP level. And secondly, you've got a guy in Jack Easterby who is unfit to be the executive VP of football operations at Houston Texans. And when you have someone in a job like that who isn't fit to have that job, dysfunction is the expected result because he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and he doesn't know how to go about doing the thing that he has no idea how to do. And this is the kind of stuff that you get when you have that kind of management of your football operation, Myles.
No doubt about it. And that was another interesting answer that David Culley had in that press conference. It was, well, what exactly is Jack Easterby's role in personnel? And then he sort of started talking about, well, Nick is the general manager and Jack Easterby is the vice president of football operations. And that means he does things like scheduling and he's involved in all kinds of things. And he does a great job with everything that he does in the organization. And it's kind of like, well, that's not really a sufficient answer. And also, it really doesn't tell you exactly what Jack Easterby is doing on a day-to-day basis when it comes to personnel. So no matter what you want to say about Nick Caserio and the fact that he is the GM, yes, that's very true. But we all know that Jack Easterby has the ear of Cal McNair, and that's the owner. And there's nobody higher up in the organization than the owner. So when these things happen, you're right, Mike. It just speaks to the kind of dysfunction that is happening right now with that Houston team. It is really just a no-win situation for the guy, I think, who is a head coach right now in David Culley. There's just no way to win right now. I don't know how this guy is going to be able to have a successful first season because of everything that's going on. It's just a lot. And there's a part of me that kind of feels bad for him because this is his first opportunity to be a head coach. And when you look at what the situation is, it's just really, really, really dysfunctional.
One of the things I love about the NFL, not that I think it's a great thing, it's a bad thing, but it's a reality of pro football. The billion-dollar football operations that are highly, supposedly, specialized and technical and refined and everything's put in place for a certain purpose. And then every team is essentially owned and operated by a monarchy where the power goes from generation to generation, or sibling to sibling, or husband to wife, or wife to husband, or whoever. It doesn't get sold when the person who's in charge of it dies. It passes to someone in the family, and that sets the stage for the possibility of dysfunction. And usually through that dysfunction, these teams still print money, because you have to try. This is Brewster's Millions on steroids to try to lose money as an NFL team. Yeah, you just can't lose money. But you can have a team that has no idea what it's doing if that prince, in this case, who takes over the team, hires a jester to be in charge of the football operation, and nobody has the self-awareness to understand how badly this is going and how badly it will continue to go.
Yeah, there's a football team a helmet behind me of the Cleveland Browns that knows pretty much exactly what you're talking about. I mean, when Al Lerner passed away there in the early 2000s, his team passed on to Randy Lerner, and that team was just the epitome of dysfunction for over a decade. And then it still was, really, until I guess kind of last year, basically, when they finally hired Andrew Berry to take over the football operation and Kevin Stefanski. So when you have this kind of deal, when you have somebody who is an owner that is overwhelmed and basically doesn't have a good gauge of what he is doing and is starting to trust the wrong people, and I think we can pretty definitively say that trusting Jack Easterby seems like he's trusting the wrong person based on all of the different reports that have come out of there in Houston. This is the kind of thing that starts to happen. You have your head coach saying something on the same day to a podcast that is different hours later than what he's saying in a press conference. That is just not good. It is just the epitome of dysfunction, and Houston has to do something in order to figure this out. And honestly, I think the most competent thing that they could do is trade Deshaun Watson and get a good young quarterback in return.
And let me give you an example of the failure of having a comprehensive media strategy and PR strategy like the Texans apparently do at this point. The last thing they should have done is have this ricochet of Culley's words to the Huddle and Flow podcast being chased almost immediately by this press conference and such a conflicting message. And this is why you have someone in PR who asks the questions, okay, when is this podcast airing? When is it debuting? And you work with the coach because you understand it's coming out the same day as the press conference, and we need to be sure our messaging is on point as to Deshaun Watson, and here's what we're going to say, and you understand that, right? And that just clearly isn't there. It's clearly not there. And when everything works well, you don't notice it. It's when it doesn't work well that it becomes conspicuous, and we say, what the hell are they doing? And this was a what the hell are they doing kind of a day for the Texans that all traces back to the fact that they just don't have ultimately the right person in place to run the football operation, and then that person is moving on from people for the wrong reasons, and the people who end up in some of these key jobs either are over their skis. You know, that was my listening to Culley today, and I feel bad for the guy. I mean, this is a guy who was a career position coach who was never mentioned as a potential head coach at the NFL level. Never, ever, ever. Name has never been on the radar screen, and there are plenty of lifetime assistant NFL coaches who, you know, they'll have a job, they fill a role, they serve a purpose, they'll never be a head coach. And that was Culley. He was in that category. And watching him, listening to him, inescapable conclusion, he's over his skis. Well, it's not a surprise. Jack Easterby, over his skis. Who's ever in charge of PR, clearly over their skis. Owner, over his skis. That's it. They should change the logo to a bull on skis that are turned upside down, because everybody's over their skis. The only one who probably isn't is Nick Caserio, and he's likely losing his mind every day because he's surrounded by people who are over their skis.
Yeah, I have to imagine that when Nick Caserio heard what was coming out of that podcast today, and probably initially saw Jim Trotter's tweet whenever that came out in the early afternoon today, he probably just put his head in his hands like, I can't believe this. Because he was pretty staunch in saying exactly what the messaging was. We're not trading Deshaun Watson. We're not trading Deshaun Watson. And all the reporting out of there has been that that's what they want to continue to do. But the other thing is, though, where's Nick Caserio, man? Why isn't he out there answering the questions? Because ultimately, if it is the general manager's job to take care of personnel, and he's the one that's going to be executing whether or not there's a trade, then he's the one who really should be out there answering these questions. And for all the people that you just mentioned, Mike, he is the one who's supposedly not over his skis. Then he should be the one who's in the offseason answering questions about what transactions the Texans are or are not going to make.
What I would have done, what I would have recommended, not that anyone should ever listen to me, but hey, if we're going to go with people who are over their skis, then give me a couple of polls and let me head down the ramp. But what I would have done, I would have canceled the press conference today, Myles. I would have said, hey, we got to do, let's say coach is sick. I hate having to endorse a flat-out prevarication like that, but I'd say we just can't do it. Not even give a reason. We're going to do it next week because we need to have a few days to think about what he's going to say in light of what he said on that podcast. How do we change our messaging? Because we can't have this. We can't have this bang of he's our quarterback right now to throwing him out there into this pit where he's got to try to sell over and over again. And I'm surprised, frankly, and maybe they were lucky that the press conference happened so quickly in time after the quotes came out, because I didn't get the impression that any of the reporters on that call were aware of what was said to Weish and Trotter, because nobody built that into a question. Nobody said, either directly or indirectly, you've characterized Deshaun Watson as your quarterback right now. What do you mean by that? So I think they got a little lucky. Now, the end result is still a mess, but it could have been worse. If one of those folks would have been aware of what Culley had said to Trotter and Weish, they could have really gone after him and put him in even more of a box than he was put in.
Yeah, and I think part of that was that Trotter's tweet came out, I believe, before the presser, but we didn't have an exact quote. So if I have the timeline correctly in my mind, after the press conference was over, that's when I believe I first saw Trotter and Weish tweet the full quote of what that was from David Culley, and then they both put it on Twitter. And I think I retweeted it saying, look, like between the time this was recorded and the time that David Culley's presser happened, somebody came to him and said, hey, man, you cannot characterize what's going on with Deshaun Watson in this way. So I think you're right. It might have just been that the reporters in Houston did not have the full quotes of what David Culley had said before. And so then they couldn't use his words and ask him that question because it just, the whole thing was just weird in that way. It just, he's saying something completely different than what he had said, presumably hours before that, Mike.
I think that I'm looking back at the tweets or the texts, that we exchange among the PFT writers, and MDS said that the tweet from Trotter said Watson's on the roster right now, and that's when I said, hey, I think Culley has a press conference soon, and I looked it up, and it was starting in 15 minutes. So it was a limited window for anybody to figure out what was happening, but hopefully Nick Caserio will be talking soon, and he'll get to deal with the aftermath of today's mess that was created by the Houston Texans.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.